Today is my second installment of Headscale. This time I'm going to run it up on Docker and it's going to have a web UI for easy client deployment and control. If you're interested in seeing how I do this, come check it out. When I did my Headscale video, I was asked to show how to run Headscale in a Docker container and also how to run Headscale with a UI so that you don't have to run it from the command line. So this is going to be that video for those who asked for it. I'm only going to show one of the web UIs. There are several listed on the Headscale website. If you go to the references pane here, there is a web UI tab on the left side, and it shows you 6 different UIs that are not a part of Headscale but are done by a third party. I'm only showing one because, for one, they're not all up to date. For example, if I go to this Headscale web UI, you can see it hasn't been updated since 2023, so it's not exactly up to date. I've looked at 2 of these web UIs, one of them being Headplane and Headscale-Admin. And yesterday, actually, when I first started recording, Headplane had some breaking changes in it. It's still functional, you can still use it, but not every feature works. So I'm not going to be showing that one today. I'm only going to be going over this Headscale-Admin. Now, truth be told, Headscale-Admin was my favorite of the 2 when they were both working, because Headplane was working just fine when I was doing my testing, but when I started recording, that's when it stopped working. The only advantage that Headplane had over Headscale-Admin anyway was if you wanted to use OIDC, or Open Identification, like through an identity provider like Google. Since I'm not using that, Headscale-Admin is actually just perfect for me. Sorry, this is Kyle from the future here. While I was editing this, I realized that I forgot to mention that Headplane also has a great way of dealing with your DNS settings. So that's also another great feature of Headplane. Anyway, sorry for the interruption. Now back to the video. So before I started recording, I actually spun up a Cloud VPS instance on Linode. It doesn't really matter which provider you use, just as long as it's got a public IP address. Or if you wanted to use a dynamic DNS, you can host this at home with port forwarding on your home network. But for this demonstration, I figured it was easier just to use a VPS. This cloud system is just running Debian. The only thing that I've done before I started recording was I went in and disabled the root user, and I did install Docker. If you're not familiar with how to do that, you can just Google how to install Docker on Debian. The top result is actually from the Docker website. So the Docker webpage has really clear instructions. They're very good. This first block here will remove any pre-installed Docker packages. Since I was using a fresh VPS, I didn't need to do any of that. And then if you scroll down a bit further, this first block will set up the repository so that you can keep Docker up to date. So you just grab each of these lines, copy and paste them into the command line. And then if we scroll down a bit more, this line here will install all the packages you need for Docker to run. So I did that when I started recording the first time, but it's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to go through that again. Now, to make Headscale and the web UI fast and easy to deploy, I made a GitHub repository that has a Docker Compose file and a Headscale config file. So I'm just going to go to this code block here and copy this URL. Then I'm going to switch over to my terminal, which I'm SSH'd into my cloud instance. And I'm just going to clone that repository here. So I will run git clone and then paste that URL in. And that should copy the contents of that repository here. So if I list that out, you can see I've got a new directory. And I'm just going to cd into that. I'm going to go over this compose file quickly with you so you can see what's going on. So in here, we've got 3 services that are going to be started up. The first one is Headscale. I've declared the image that we're going to use, and I've given it a container name. I've also set a restart policy of unless stopped. So if you're unfamiliar with that, that's just going to start the container again if for any reason it crashes, unless you declare that you want the container to stop with a Docker command. The command line for serve is just going to run that command within the container as it starts up. All that's doing is starting up Headscale within the container. We've got 2 volumes. We've got a data volume, which is going to provide the working data for Headscale. It's going to have things like the keys for your clients and your ACLs. We've also got a configs volume, which is going to provide that config file to Headscale within the container. Below that, we've got an environment variable that just sets the time zone within the container. I've set this to America Edmonton because that's the time zone that I'm in, but you just set it to whatever's appropriate for you. Below that, we've got labels for this service, which are actually for our last service, which is our reverse proxy. I'm not going to cover the details of what all of this does because that kind of requires a Trafic video just in itself. Just know that you'll have to go to this second label here and change the contents between these 2 single quotes to whatever domain you're hosting your Headscale instance on. So I'm going to change this to mine, which is hs.hardwoodhomelabdemo.xyz. Then if we scroll down, our second service is Headscale-Admin. This is actually the web UI that we're going to be using. I've declared the image here, the container name, and the same restart policy as before. And then we also have labels once again for our reverse proxy. You'll have to change again the domain or the host rule here. You'll want to use the exact same host name that you've used up here. And then lastly, our final service is Trafic, which, as I had said before, is our reverse proxy. This container is going to handle all the web traffic coming to and from this server, and it's going to handle the encryption on that web traffic as well. So Trafic is going to have to grab a certificate from Let's Encrypt. If it didn't, then your browser would be complaining that it doesn't have a secure connection. So that kind of leads me to these 2 lines here. If your settings are not correct and this container keeps reaching out to Let's Encrypt can block your account for a period of time, or block your domain requests for a period of time. So before I do the final deployment of this container stack, I'm going to do some testing first, and I'm just going to uncomment these 2 lines so that we can grab a certificate from the Let's Encrypt staging authority and verify that everything is working first. I'll show you how that works. But there's one last thing that we need to change before it's ready to be deployed, and that is on this line here. For Let's Encrypt, you should always use a legitimate email so that Let's Encrypt can communicate with you if there are any issues. So I'm just going to delete this email and I'll put in my totally real email. And with that, I'm going to write and quit. Now that we've done the changes that we need to in the compose file, we can change the config file. So I'll use vim for that. And that was headscale config.yaml. If you watched my previous Headscale video, this should look very familiar. It's the exact same config file I used. The only thing you'll need to change in this document is the server URL. And this will have to match the same domain that you put into the compose file. So I will just enter that quickly. Now this is ready to be saved. If you watched my previous video, there's 2 other things that are different. For one, if you scroll down to the TLS section, none of this needs to be filled out. When I was using a standalone Headscale server, Headscale was reaching out to Let's Encrypt and grabbing the TLS certificate. Since I'm using a reverse proxy in this container stack, Headscale doesn't need to grab a certificate. All of that encryption is going to be handled by Trafic. The other thing that's different, and this is important, is under the policy section, I've switched the mode to database. By switching this to database, it allows us to set ACL policies within the web UI. If we didn't do this, it would be able to see our ACL policies, but it wouldn't be able to make any changes. So, with that, our config file is ready. I'm going to write and quit, and we can deploy this stack. So to do that, I'm just going to run the command docker, compose up -d. So this is just pulling down those containers, and it will start them as soon as it's done. This should only take a couple seconds, and it's done. Now, we should be able to access this from the browser. Also, I forgot to mention earlier, and this is very important, before deploying this stack, I had set a public DNS record that was pointing back to this VPS. If you didn't do that, you cannot pull a certificate. This is also why that testing is very important. So I'm going to switch to my browser. I'm going to grab a new tab, and we're going to go to the hs.hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. And we get a warning, your connection is not private. Keep in mind, this is expected behavior because we were using the Let's Encrypt staging authority. So let's take a look at our certificate and see if we got one from Let's Encrypt. And we did. You can see it shows the Let's Encrypt staging authority. So since we have the staging certificate, that means that Let's Encrypt was happy with how things are looking on our DNS records and whether it can reach our server. And so the staging authority issued us our certificate. That means if we take off our testing tags from our Docker Compose file, that we should get a legitimate certificate. So that's what I wanted to see in the browser, and that means I'm ready to deploy the stack in its final form. I'll switch back to my terminal. I'm just going to clear this, and I'm going to bring that stack down. I'm going to run Docker Compose down, and that's just going to stop all those containers. And since we grabbed a new certificate with that staging authority, we're going to have to remove that. So I'm just going to run sudo, since that certificate is owned by root, rm, and there should be a new directory in here called Let's Encrypt with an ACME file, and I'm just going to remove that. I need to enter in my password. And now that we don't have a certificate, I can make the changes on the compose file. So in here, I'm just going to scroll down to these testing lines. I'm going to put in a pound symbol, and that's just going to comment out these lines, and Trafic will ignore them when we start the stack again. So with those done, I can write and quit. And we can deploy the stack with the same command we ran before, docker compose up -d. Now I should have a legitimate certificate on here. If I refresh the page, I'll just go to the admin page. If I can type. And if everything is working, this is what you should see. If you take a look at your certificate, we've got a valid certificate from Let's Encrypt, and we are ready to use this web UI. So in order for this web UI to interact with Headscale, we're going to need an API key. That's how Headscale is going to authenticate this application so that you can make changes within Headscale. So to do that, I need to switch back to the terminal. In here, I'm going to run a Docker command. So up till this point, it's just telling Docker we want to execute a command on the interactive terminal on the container of Headscale, and then within the Headscale, it's going to run the command Headscale API key create. And that spits out a long string of characters. This is the key to the kingdom. This API key is what's going to allow any application that has it access to Headscale settings. So keep it secret, keep it safe, keep it secure. For this demo, it's okay that you see it. That's because I'm going to be deleting this stack shortly after recording, so it won't make a difference. It is important that this does not get out. If you lose this key, you can create another one, and you can spit out as many as you need. Also, you will never be able to see this key again. If you list the keys in this container, it will just show you numbers, and it'll show you a small snippet, the first little bit from that key, and that's all you can see. You'll never be able to get the whole string again. So I'm just going to copy one of my keys now. I'll go with number 2. I'll copy that, and we'll go back to the browser. In here, just paste that API key. And before you click Save Settings, probably a good idea to choose the look that you want so that you don't have to go through this again. I personally like this Gold Nouveau. So we'll save settings, and it shows here settings are saved. I just want to be clear, those settings are saved locally on the browser that you are using to access this service. It is not stored on the server at all. So if you go to another computer and you try to sign in on this, you're going to need that API key again. Now, with the settings saved, we are ready to administer this site. But one thing I don't like is there should be some fields on the left. You have to refresh the page in order to get them. And you're now ready to use Headscale. If we go to the home page, this kind of just gives you an overview of everything that's going on, all the users, all the pre-auth keys, etc. Let's start using this. So I'm going to create a new user. We'll click Create, and I'll call this one Big Kahuna. You have to hit the checkbox here, and it will create that new user. We get a little pop-up that says that it worked. And I'll make a few more users just for the examples here. I'll say Little Fish, Stingray, and Todd. Now with some users created, we're ready to deploy our nodes. To do that is super simple. If we go to the deploy page, it gives us the tailscale up command. In fact, it's got checkboxes for every potential alternative command. So for example, if I wanted just to run tailscale up and connect it as is, I just click this. I'll go down to a client. I'm SSH'd into a tailscale client. I will paste that command in and hit enter. Oh right, I need to use sudo. And hit enter. It says to authenticate, visit this URL. And you can go to that URL. It will give you a command to run for Headscale directly, but we don't need to use that. We'll just select everything to the right side of this slash and copy this. That is our machine ID. I'll go back to the browser, go to Nodes, Create. I'll paste that device key and select the owner that it's going to belong to. So I'll give this one to Big Kahuna. It says that node is created. And if we give that a second, this should turn green, which it did. And that shows that we are connected. Our tailnet is effectively live with one machine. Let's say that we need to deploy more. I'm going to go back to the users page and give Big Kahuna a pre-auth key. This is great if you want a one and done command to run on the node. So I'm going to click create. I'm going to make this one reusable so I can use it on more than one node. And I will create it just like that. I'll go back to the deploy page and we'll say this one uses a pre-auth key. You select the user that you want and the pre-auth key, and that just stabs it into the command up here. Let's say you want it to have an SSH server on it. We'll add that in here as well. I will click that copy command, and here on our second node, I'm just going to run sudo and paste that command in here, and we are enabled. It does say that SSH is enabled, but we don't have any ACLs that will allow this. I will show that in a bit. And on a third node, I'm just going to paste that again. And we should have 3 nodes connected to our tailnet. So I'm going to look at our nodes, and they are all there. Quick, easy deployment. So let's say that I've got all the nodes I want now for Big Kahuna. I'm going to go back to users. I'll select Big Kahuna. And I can click this trash can here to expire this reusable key. That way it can't be used anymore. I gotta click this checkbox afterwards. Now be careful, don't use this trash can here because that will delete the user entirely. Now for my other users, I'm going to create some ephemeral keys. That means we can use it once and then that key will automatically expire. So let's put little fish in. We'll grab the pre-auth key. And let's say that little fish is going to be an exit node. I'm just going to grab that. I think everybody should also accept routes. And everyone should accept DNS. Okay, I'll copy this. Paste. Let's say Stingray has a file server on his network that he wants to share with everyone. We'll get rid of that advertise exit node and we'll advertise a route. In here you want to enter the subnet in CIDR format. Now you can enter in single IPs in here if you need to as well. You'll still need to use CIDR formatting. So let's say this one is at 192.168.1.12. You'll have to give it a /32 for a single IP. So with those advertised routes in here, I'm just going to grab that command, paste, and we get a little warning here that IP forwarding is disabled. If you follow this link, Tailscale has really great instructions that are very clear on how to do the IP forwarding. I'm not going to do it in this video because I did that in my previous Headscale video. So if you want to see how that's done, you can go to that particular video. If not, just follow this link. It will show you exactly how to set up IP forwarding very clear. So let's say that Todd has a gaming server that he wants to share with everyone. We can add a tag to this and we'll say gaming server, very simply. Now, in order for this command to work, we need to have an ACL rule that allows these tags. So I'm going to do things somewhat out of order here, and I'm going to go to ACLs. I'm going to go to tag owner policies and create a tag. And here we're going to call a new tag called game server. I'll click yes. And then the owners will be, we'll put everybody in there. All you got to do is click them. I'll save that tag. I'll go back to the deploy tab. I'll copy that command and paste. So now if I look at my nodes, I should have 6, and I do. Now that we've got some nodes deployed, we can set up some routes and some ACLs. If I go to the routes page, this is super simple. We've got on TS4 our exit node that was advertised. In order to enable those routes, you just flip the switch. If you're curious, the top one is for IPv4 and the bottom one is for IPv6. And it's the same thing on the bottom one. We can click the top one to enable routes to Stingray's local subnet or to enable routes to that single IP. While playing around on the routes page, I found that this will turn off all the routes and this will turn on all the routes. So routes are really easy to deal with, and ACLs are just about as easy. You caught a glimpse of it earlier, but we've got the ability to make all the changes right here within the web UI. So if I wanted to create a group, I can do that. So let's create a couple groups in here. We'll call one gamers. And we'll add everybody into this group. We'll create another group. Yeah, we'll call this one file users. Group name must be lowercase. Whoops. File users. And in here we'll have Stingray and Big Kahuna. Just for 2 simple examples, I'll click save, and that will write it to the ACL rules. I've got a tag owner. You've seen how that works. And we've got hosts. Host is great if you want to declare a single device or user. So we can create a host. Let's say this one is file server with the host value of 192.168. What did I call that one? 2.12, I think it was. So before this point, everything on the left is just creating definitions for devices and routes. Now this is where we create the policies that control who has access to what. So our first policy is down here. If we wanted to create a rule to allow everyone access to the game server, we can give this whatever name we want. Game server access. So in the sources, this is where you define who has access to it. We'll go with the group because we have our gamers group. We'll scroll down, and then in here we will define what they have access to. So with this, I'm just going to use the tag game server. You can define whatever ports that they have access to. So this is great if you have, say, a Plex server that runs on 32400. You could put that specific port in here. If you know what port the game server is using, you would define that right here. I'm just going to put a asterisk for a wildcard, which will allow all ports. With that policy created, I'll click save, and I am done with that policy. I can create another one. Let's say file server access. I created a group for this one as well, so I'll use file users and give them access to specific host since I defined it before. And let's just say the file server has a custom port that we have at 8570. We'll define the port there, and that one is ready to use. Oh, I skipped over to the protocol. If this uses TCP, UDP, ICMP, you can define it up here just by selecting whichever one. I'll make an ICMP rule just to show how that works. So we'll create a policy of ICMP. I'll call this one allow ping. And I'm just going to put in the asterisk in here for a wildcard. Destination object asterisk for a wildcard. And this will allow anybody to ping anyone on the subnet. So I'll save that. And with that, we've got 3 policies created. Now, if you'll recall, I put an SSH rule on Big Kahuna. To allow access to that, we need to create an SSH rule here. So I'll put Big Kahuna has access to destination objects owned by Big Kahuna. And with that, I'll save it. It's very easy to go in and customize this. And what's brilliant is the final tab shows you that config file as if it were something that's on the system. So you can actually copy this, paste it into another document, and have a backup. It's really easy to save the configs. And if there's anything that you need to change that you can't do with these other tabs, you can edit it right here in the browser. So I can just go in here, type a bunch of gobbledygook, and then hit save. It's not going to let me do that right now because I have some invalid characters. Oh, auto repair. I've never tried that. Oh, well, that's neat. But it double checks your config to make sure that it's legitimate. And then if it is, you can apply the config and save it. It's really slick. This Headscale-Admin web UI is bloody amazing. They have covered pretty much every scenario that I can think of, with the exception of one. If I could change anything in here, it would be in the deploy section. It should pull these tags from your ACL rules. You can't use the tags until the tags are in the ACL rules anyway, so you shouldn't be able to add a tag on here that hasn't been defined yet. Outside of that, I wouldn't change a thing. So that is Headscale in Docker and with a web UI. I'm surprised this UI is full-featured, and I think it might even be a little bit easier than using the CLI. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section down below. In the meantime, my name is Kyle. This is Hardwood Home Lab, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh man, I have the memory of a goldfish. I set this as game server.